following program has been rated T for truth.
You can't handle the truth!
Oh, we think you can. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report with your host, truth warrior and mythbuster, Kathleen Wells. The place where we distinguish fact from fiction, where data is used to drive points home, and where Kathleen takes the position that Democrats and black politicians have destroyed black America. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report. Now, your host, Kathleen Wells.
Welcome. This is Kathleen Wells, your host of the Naked Truth Report. And let's see. We have a great guest this evening. We're going to have him on the phone in a few minutes. It's Chris Farrell with Judicial Watch. And Chris Farrell actually went down to Guatemala along with Sarah Carter. This is going to be fantastic, I think. It's going to be fantastic because, what has happened to media? What has happened to investigative journalism? The American people, Trump is right when he says the media is the enemy of the American people. I mean, it's not kosher to say that. It's not politically correct to say that. The media folks are so offended by that, or their egos are so involved by that. But we've been betrayed by the mainstream media because what they're telling us about this, air quotes, caravan coming into marching towards the U.S. border is not accurate. It's not the truth. I mean, the American people are entitled to the truth. The mainstream media is essentially just pushing the agenda of a political party. How does that serve the American people? How pushing the agenda of one political party, how does that serve the American people? How? I don't know, and this party, a party which has destroyed Black America, and they never talk about that. If the media were accurate, if the media were honest, if the media were was on the side of the American people, which they're supposed to be, because that's what the First Amendment is about. If they were on the side of the American people, there would be so many different, they would have a study. How has Black America benefited since being with the Democrats for 5 decades? We'd see that study. Anyway, my guest is on the line, right? And I'm so excited to have Chris Farrell, who is the Director of Investigations. And let's see, my engineer just walked away. But anyway, he's the Director of Investigations and Research for Judicial Watch. And Chris, are you on the line? Oh, you're not on the line? He's not on the line yet. I have to wait for my engineer to walk back. But anyway, he'll be on the line shortly. But anyway, he's having a problem getting I see him walking around. But anyway, I see him walking around. Anyway, I'm excited to have my guest. It's Chris Farrell with Judicial Watch. He's the Director of Investigations and Research for Judicial Watch. And he went down to Guatemala with Sarah Carter. And he spoke with the president of Guatemala, President Morales. So that's going to be exciting to have him on. And I see my engineer, Jeff. Are you ready? Are you ready? Okay. Hi, Chris. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report. This is Kathleen.
It's great to be with you. Thanks very much.
I'm so excited to have you. And, I'm critical of journalism of the mainstream media because they're not giving the American people what's really going on. So give us, what's the 411 on this so-called caravan?
Yeah, well, let me tell you, we decided that we were going to go, at Judicial Watch, we were going to go out and commit an act of journalism because we got really tired of people sitting in their studios in Washington and New York and talking about it, but not actually getting out and doing the interviews of the people involved, whether it was actually out on the road with the people who were moving north, or in our case, we were very fortunate. We had tremendous access to the Guatemalan government, the Minister of Defense, their intelligence chief, and then all the way up to the president. So we kind of put our money where our mouth is, and we went out and spent about 4 days in Guatemala. And the Reader's Digest version is that this is a wave of humanity. Caravan is a nice word. This is actually sort of an intermittent surge. There's wave after wave of people coming. they're overwhelmingly males between the ages of 15 and 40. So when you see pictures of women and children, they are there, that's for certain, but they are really in a super minority.
Yeah, you said something like 98% of the folks are males.
That is correct. Yeah. I mean, it's just it is, and like I said, 15 to 40. I mean, there's probably some outliers either way, but that is by far the bulk, 98% easily.
Mm-hmm. And also, you mentioned that this was actually an elaborate organization, organized. It was organized. So who's paying?
Yeah, and that's from that information is from two different directions. Number one, so I went down with my colleague Irene Garcia out of our Miami office, and we brought along Fox contributor Sarah Carter, and both Sarah and Irene have native fluency in Spanish, so their ability to communicate directly, ask questions, interact was tremendous, a huge asset to us. And so, what we saw, who we interviewed, our eyewitness account of the level of organization, the details, the very elaborate sort of staged way in which the caravan or the migration, whatever you want to call it, that's what we saw. But then we also spoke with the Minister of Defense, and his parallel, his example was that it was being carried out with the same precision and level of detail as a military operation.
Mm-hmm. The same precision as a military operation. So before we get into that, back up a little bit and tell us exactly some of the things that you heard from the people who were in this wave of people.
Yeah, so, like I said, it is wave after wave. The word caravan is way too sort of cute or nice of a term. It's an intermittent river of humanity. There are breaks and gaps, but there's wave after wave of groups coming up. And when you talk to the folks that we interviewed, again, overwhelmingly, they were not people who were claiming some sort of political persecution or, harassment by the police or all the things that are normally sort of invoked as being asylum worthy. Again, way up in the 90th percentile, the people that we interviewed said, "Hey, look, we're just coming for a better job. We just, we want to get a good job. We want to come to America. We want to start a new life." It was all sort of, they were economic refugees. They are not legitimate asylum seekers in the legal technical sense. All sorts of examples of, my cousin is in Texas and he says he can hook me up with a job, or, I've got, or guys who would say, "Look, I was deported. I have a wife and 2 kids back in Chicago." I mean, there were innumerable examples of that.
And yet we keep hearing from the mainstream media that this is not only a caravan, but they're seeking asylum. And this is this argument, the argument in the mainstream media is just surrounded by these folks are seeking asylum. They're fearing all the crime and violence in Honduras. So
I'm sure that, there are parts of Honduras that they are facing crime and violence. I'm not discounting that. But again, overwhelmingly, these people are saying it was an economic decision, it was an employment decision, it was a financial decision. And frankly, I just look. The mainstream media has an agenda. They have their own sort of talking points and their own lexicon of acceptable language that they want to use. And so they're fast and loose with their terminology. And they try to paint the most sympathetic picture they possibly can to advance part of their agenda.
And why is that exactly?
Well, I mean, I think in very large part, a lot of the mainstream media acts as essentially the public relations, the propaganda arm of the left. Yeah. And so they've got an agenda with respect to open borders and, amnesties and, kind of wholesale enrollment of persons coming from the South, North, to all the sort of benefits and privileges of citizenship, to include, of course, voting. And so, you know, the notion of people just, you know, entering the country unlawfully and then, you know, waving a magic wand and having them somehow be granted citizenship, you know, is their dream come true. And so they attempt to influence that and shape the argument or shape the discussion in such a way as to either make it very appealing or to make it seem like a fait accompli, or, you know, but it is clearly agenda driven.
And in fact, if there was so much crime, you know, I heard someone on my Facebook page mention a Latino woman from Central America. She said, you know, there are plenty of towns and cities throughout Central America, Honduras, that are safe and where you can find work. So if there was so much crime and violence in Honduras, why would these men be leaving their wives and children back home?
That's exactly correct. I mean, again, innumerable cases of, you know, which people say, okay, so you've left your village, your town, is your family traveling with you? And half the time the answer was no, because we left them behind, which again begs the question, why would you leave the most vulnerable behind if it's that dangerous, right? And then the other half of the time, or not half, but another significant percentage of the time, they'd say, oh no, my wife and kids are already in the United States, because either they decided to go home to take care of some business and they were returning, you know, because maybe there's some other family issue or whatever, or they had been deported and were seeking to re-enter the country, actually feloniously. I mean, re-entry following deportation is a felony. And so they knew that, and they were heading north anyway.
Disobeying our laws, ignoring our laws. So you spoke with the president of Guatemala. What did he have to say?
Well, I can tell you that he has very grave concerns on a number of fronts. At the level of this kind of mass of humanity moving north, he has a health and safety issue. I mean, that's kind of his first priority of, you know, these people are violating his laws. He's worried about everything from kind of crowd management to, you know, bathrooms, to how the police can manage the traffic, to securing his border. They really are, in my opinion, you know, bending over backwards, trying to even dissuade people from even continuing on the march. In the period that I was there, I'm sure the numbers have changed, but if you back up about 10 days, they had already turned around just shy of 4,000 Hondurans and bussed them back to their country. So while a number headed north and a number essentially broke into Mexico, they kind of surged at the border, the Guatemalans were successful in identifying folks and saying, look, this is unlawful. It's not going to work. You're endangering yourselves. This is a very dangerous situation. There's criminal elements operating within the caravans themselves. Go home. And they did return them. On another front, the president expressed frustration with the organizing groups and elements that are promoting this. And he is launching a criminal investigation to determine exactly what these groups were doing and how and why they violated laws, what they were doing, who was financing them. You know, his concern is that these people are operating with impunity and just thumbing their nose at the law.
And in fact, aren't there leftist groups in Honduras and NGOs or organizations in the United States affiliated with those groups?
Absolutely. And, you know, some of them have gotten some press. Sin Fronteras, among them, there's the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, which has received millions of dollars of government funding from the Justice Department and Homeland Security and others. And, you know, part of this also is that, you know, there's some obvious sort of overt groups, but then there's at the local level, there are sort of like affiliates, subsets of groups that operate more independently or operate just through general guidance. But I can tell you, having eyewitnessed it, they've established, water points, food points, rest break areas. They have men, probably the older end of the bracket, men like in their late 20s, 30s, who are operating, marching along with the groups, basically acting as sort of guides or marshals, trying to keep everybody organized and together. When the cameras come out, those same persons kind of hush everyone and have them take a seat. Mm-hmm. They direct sort of designated spokespersons to come forward for interviews. And then when you ask them, hey, you look kind of like you're in charge, you seem to be organizing this, then they immediately go, oh, no, I'm just trying to help. I'm just trying to make sure everyone's safe. Mm-hmm. So then they suddenly develop amnesia as to who they are and who organized them. And it's very interesting that well, like I said, the Minister of Defense used the word elaborate, right? And mm-hmm. I think that's probably the best descriptor for this whole process.
Yeah, it's like a hoax or a stunt or some kind of gimmick is being played on the American people, and Democrats are swallowing it, hook, line, and sinker. They're falling for this. They're gaming the system. It's like a publicity stunt.
Part of this really is it's another version of sort of the Cloward-Piven strategy of overwhelming the system, right? There was, I think, that my belief is that there are certain elements, certain organizations on the left that, they love nothing better than the imagery of sort of this human migration, this army of civilians, marching north and simply overwhelming the border, overwhelming not just the legal crossing points, the ports of entry, but also overwhelming our capacity, our ability to even process these thousands of people.
Mm-hmm. That's hating our country. And, I watched this weekend the documentary Stolen Daughters, which is set in Nigeria, northern Nigeria, about Boko Haram kidnapping, abducting hundreds, if not thousands, of Nigerian women. And security is a very important thing. And, I know that Kenya is building a wall to keep out Somalians for a reason. So tell us, I heard you say on the video I watched that you had given that even ISIS is involved, is some of these involved in the midst of this group of folks, right?
There's a broad swath of people. So President Morales of Guatemala, in an interview, indicated that over a 3-year period, they had identified approximately 100 persons that they believed were either ISIS operators or ISIS affiliates, that they were comfortable calling them that they had detained them, that they had debriefed them, and then deported them. And that's, I guess, over a 3-year period that he was referencing. But even among the groups that myself and my colleagues eyewitnessed, there were people from other countries. I think obviously you would expect Central American and even South American countries, but there were folks from Sri Lanka, the Congo, Bangladesh. These are folks that our Customs and Border Protection people would refer to as special interest aliens, SIAs, mm-hmm. Because if they're from Central and South America, that's not too much of a tough one to figure out, just based on geography. Mm-hmm. But when you have people coming from other continents and showing up in Honduras and Guatemala, that is remarkable, right? That's not the typical entry route for someone coming from another continent. Mm-hmm. My two colleagues, both of whom ethnically have Cuban ancestry, detected sort of a Cuban accent or sort of speech pattern among some of the men who were marching, and even turned and said, "Hey, are you guys Cuban?" And a few of them took off running when they mentioned that to them. We learned later that evening we learned through police officials that, in fact, the Guatemalan immigration officials at a checkpoint about 15 kilometers up the road had, in fact, detained 11 Cubans among the persons in the caravan.
Mm-hmm. And also, some human traffickers were involved, right?
This is really sad. Again, a very highly placed Guatemalan official sent me a photo of 7 children who were recovered from human smugglers. They were Honduran children, and I've learned in the last couple of days that they were, in fact, obviously the first thing was to take care of the health and safety of these kids. They're little ones. I mean, these are young kids. These are like, I'd say, 6 and under. There were 7 children that they identified that were being smuggled within this larger movement of folks. And the children were recovered. They were obviously given medical treatment and checked out, food, water, taken care of properly. And then those children have been repatriated back to Honduras and turned over to Honduran, social service groups.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so this is very distressing to hear. And this is something we do not hear from MSNBC or CNN or NBC, I mean, even Fox doesn't go into this kind of detail. And I think...
No, they don't. It's very frustrating. I'll tell you something that I think illuminates the whole problem and really goes to your point about the frustration of this. We had the opportunity to interview President Morales, who was very gracious and very frank, very forthcoming. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He just laid it out there very matter-of-factly. Mm-hmm. But as we were beginning the interview with him, his public affairs person who was organizing the interview with the president there was quite frank and said, we're actually quite grateful that you took the time to come down here and talk with us. We're happy to do this interview because no one else, no other news organization, no other journalists had even bothered to ask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, the fact that there's zero interest from any other supposed journalistic news organizations.
Right.
It speaks volumes.
Right. It speaks volumes. No more investigative journalists. It's not happening. Even Fox should go into this kind of detail. And, what is it? Who is it? Nancy Pelosi's daughter is a documentarian. She's done 10 documentaries on HBO. She should be down there, right?
Yeah, and there's a thundering silence. I mean, this is essentially, if you view Mexico as essentially a failed state, and I think you can make a pretty good argument that between the narco terror aspects compromising Mexico very seriously. So if Mexico is a failed state or teetering on being a failed state, then really our southern border now becomes Guatemala, and these Hondurans are transiting Guatemala. So that would seem to be the flashpoint or the focal point of, hey, we better go down and check this out. And frankly, that's exactly why we went there.
Mm-hmm. We're at the half hour. How do you feel about taking phone calls, Chris? Are you open?
I'll be happy to, sure.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, we're going to hear the Ronnie C. Wright Minute, and we'll be right back with Chris Farrell, who is Director of Investigations and Research at Judicial Watch. This is fantastic. I love getting the 411 from someone. This is called like firsthand knowledge. Firsthand. He was there, unlike the other folks who talk about it. So we're going to hear the Ronnie C. Wright Minute. We'll be right back, and we'll take your phone calls, and you can ask Chris a question. We'll be right back.
This is the Ronnie C. Wright Minute. Thought-provoking political commentary brought to you by PromptJet, PromptJet.com. This week's Timeless Message Award for faith, freedom, focus, family, finance, and fitness goes to the upcoming book titled The 7 Prices for American Success by yours truly, Ronnie C. Wright. The first price, yes, PRICE, stands for producing results, improving character every day. Yes, you can produce success when you pay the price to improve character every day. Our sincere thanks to all Americans who pay a daily price to help this great nation stay great. Let's keep trucking. Back to you, Kathleen.
It's symbolic, because this is what, this is a sentiment. This is a sentiment. This is a notion, but it's not reality. And this is what all these Hollywood folks and all these, these celebrities and liberals, they embrace notions or sentiments, but they don't deal with reality. And I deal with reality here on the Naked Truth Report because I've been talking about the data, how, illegal aliens and even high immigration, how it adversely impacts Black America, right? It adversely impacts America. It suppresses wages. They're coming, these folks are coming to take your job, American citizen, right? So what, I can't understand these Democrats at all. I don't understand why they can't put like 2 and 2 together, why they can't connect the dots. Why can't they peel back the layers of the onions and connect the dots that these folks are coming here because liberals are far removed from reality. I think, they're either very poor, they don't represent the middle class. They're either very poor folks or they're very rich. They're not in the middle. Do you agree with that, Chris?
Yes, I do. I mean, the only way that you buy into the notion that either semi-skilled or unskilled labor, huge masses of it, helps is if you think the poor aren't poor enough, right? I mean, you're going to drive down wages, you're going to harm the lower end of the spectrum of people who are looking for jobs, trying to get jobs. You put businesses in an impossible competitive position. You end up almost subsidizing tax cheats. The whole thing is a nightmare.
And it's been, and this is the thing, it's been going on for decades.
And frankly, it's really economics 101. Everyone knows better, but they just turn a blind eye to it.
And this has been going on for 4 decades, and President Trump has been the only one that has tried to deal with it. Members of Congress have heard from Terry Anderson, who used to host this show, and Izola Foster. They've heard from people from, Steve Camarada with the Center for Immigration Studies, and Dan Stein with, FAIR. And they know, and, Roy Beck from Numbers U, they know the data, and they just ignore it. So the members it's like our fault that we could keep electing people who are not serving the interest of the American people. And it's Democrats' fault who don't conduct research, who don't dig deep and find out the research and realize, well, it's like they can't, I don't know, what is the issue with Democrats? What do you think, what is the issue, Chris, with people who vote Democrat? What do you think that is?
Well, with respect to the topic we've been discussing, which is, illegal immigration, I think that they're just seeking to recruit for their own political purposes, the next either like wave or segment of available voters. And the thinking is, well, if we incentivize and subsidize this, we will pick up, pick a number, how many million extra votes, and that they'll be loyal in some way and vote in a party line fashion that will benefit them.
Well, let me say the phone lines are open, 866-870-5752. If you'd like to call in and ask Chris Farrell with Judicial Watch any questions about him going down to Guatemala and finding out what was going on. He's giving us the real deal, which you won't get from the mainstream media. But what I was asking you, why do you think American citizens vote Democrat when the Democratic Party has betrayed the American people? They have deceived us. How come we can't see, particularly with regards to immigration, why can't Democrat voters see through the hoax, the con, or this gimmick, so to speak?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the dominance of certain media outlets and the language and the techniques that are used to create feelings of resentment and division, and they capitalize on that. And so when you prey on people's fears, and you use sort of a jealousy, or instead of encouraging opportunity and incentivizing the possibilities of what can be, instead you make people feel as though they're getting beaten out and that they're owed something from somebody else. It's a way to get people pretty spun up, and that's a technique. It's an old political technique, but I think it goes to, philosophically, it goes to the underpinnings of what the left appeals to, and that is that the state is superior over the individual. It's really anti or counter constitutional. It's not the idea that the sovereign people tell the government what to do or not to do. The opening line of the Constitution is "We the people," not us the government, right? And so they turn it on its head, and they make the American public. I think there's a certain dependency there. I mean, the model for me is always to look at one particular government agency that I think is one that's really built on dependency and fostering that, and that is HUD, right? Housing and Urban Development, which as a one government department seems to be founded on and promoting dependency and big state answers for everything.
And it's actually sadistic for the leftists, or these leftist organizations, to drag these people thousands of miles from their home, having some of them bringing their children. There are not many children in this group. To drag them out for thousands of miles in these conditions. In fact, the weather isn't that great at this time. It's actually sadistic for them to act as a publicity stunt for political purposes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. I mean, the human consequences, the human toll on this is really the tragic part. Because let me tell you something. 6 or 8 months from now, when this is barely remembered by the average, member of the public, they'll say, "Oh yeah, there was that crazy Caravan thing." Well, guess what? Ordinary, everyday human beings are going to be still grappling with the consequences of this publicity stunt, and they'll either be displaced or, stuck going home to a situation that's worse, or I mean, there's all these sort of unintended consequences and this kind of spin-off, and the people that are organizing this are perfectly happy to sacrifice these people's lives for their political agenda.
So why don't we take a call now from Pamela in Culver City. Hi, Pamela. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report.
Hi, Kathleen. Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome.
I understand the U.S. government reason for allowing this caravan to come to the borders, basically to get their votes. But what is the Honduras government reason for sending their people to the U.S. border? What does the U.S. or the Honduran government gain from this?
Well, I think a couple things. The Honduran president has made public statements blaming left-wing agitators and organizers for starting this. I think there's probably one additional sort of level to the question, and that is, well, what are the conditions and circumstances that in Honduras that make it right for that? So I think there's probably Honduran domestic situations that lend themselves or create the circumstances that allow leftist groups to act as agitators and to organize this. So the problem may be a little more complex than the Honduran president is talking about. But let's just take it at face value. We know that all these people have started marching north, and they were organized to do it. It's without a doubt. What's the long-term consequence for Honduras? I mean, the Guatemalans are turning around thousands of them and sending them back home. I wish I had an answer to this. I can just tell you what I eyewitnessed and what I can report having talked to these officials. But the problem starts literally and figuratively in Honduras. I'm not sure what the answer is for it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the Honduran government started this caravan, or this U.S. Democrat organization start this caravan? Whose idea?
I think there's a little bit of synergy there. I think the conditions and circumstances in Honduras were bad enough that there were domestic problems, that there was political stress, economic stress, and then I think that there were groups on the left that saw the conditions and circumstances in Honduras and said, aha, this is a perfect place to go start to agitate and organize. And so, the Honduran government and that the Honduran people were in a place economically, financially, that was, like a medical experiment. It was a petri dish, right? There was an environment and sort of an infection or a problem, a contamination, economically, financially, job-wise, whatever. And then groups saw that and said, aha, we see what the problem is, we see what the conditions are, and we know how to exploit that.
Okay, thank you, Pamela, for calling into the Naked Truth Report. So now there's even more. There's 4 more groups behind this group. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, when at the point that I left Honduras, when I left Guatemala, the sort of scuttlebutt or the speculation, sort of an informed opinion, was that another wave was going to be launched out of El Salvador, which is the neighboring country to the west of Honduras, that is, with an adjacent border, a border with Guatemala. And they didn't have firm or solid information, but they believed that another wave was coming out of El Salvador. And then sure enough, I was back here in the United States about 4 days, and what happened? Another wave broke and came through out of El Salvador. So this is not going to stop anytime soon. I mean, the more publicity, the more discussion it gets, the more the word gets out. And I think that there are people also actively agitating to push that along.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's actually like a humanitarian catastrophe. I mean,
it really is. I mean, there's going to be long-term consequences to this. This is not just a one-shot deal. This is months and years out.
And and if we accept these folks into the United States, which is completely unimaginable. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen, but then another wave will come. It's unending, it's unending, because we just had this in April, right?
Correct. And this is a case where you get what you subsidize, right? So, or you get more of whatever it is that you subsidize. So the more we sort of, set these examples and make it apparent that we're not serious, or it's going to be a wink and nod, no big deal, or, we'll huff and puff, but we really won't do anything about it. The more that message is sent, guess what we're going to get more of?
More of the same. So what do you think Trump's going to do? He sent, 10,000 to the border?
Yeah, I think he's very serious. I think those, frankly, even domestically here in the United States, his political opponents who think that this is just, election huff and puff or bluster, I think they're in for a big surprise. I think that the organizers, on both sides of the board that are, trying to use this as a publicity stunt for elections or for trying to get more voters.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're in for a very rude surprise, because I believe the president is going to come down on this very hard. He's going to give new, clear direction, everything from Border Patrol to ICE to Homeland Security to the military themselves. I do not believe that you're going to see this as a successful kind of break-in to the United States.
But, the left is, no matter what Trump does, the left is going to use it, and the media, to paint Trump as like, the devil incarnate, Well,
whatever, every ism, every smear, every label, every, exaggerated, baseless, way that you can, smear somebody, just count on it being said.
We're going to hear the whole kitchen sink negative about Trump, but the vast majority of the American people want our border secured. And
I agree, and I think there's tons of polling data that confirms that. Look, they're bad boys. I saw young men with Gothic script MS, tattooed on their necks or on their collarbones, in the groups moving. I had police and security officials in Guatemala, point out people that they thought were of concern. They were questioning them in some cases, but in other cases, you couldn't be really sure. These guys did not look like angels, but that doesn't mean anything, of course. Just because a person looks kind of scary doesn't mean they are scary, obviously. But they had other evidence of criminal activity, of human trafficking, of sort of gang activity within the groups because of the way that when they would stop for the night in these rest areas, obviously it was of great concern to the Guatemalan police officials, and so they would do all they could to maintain safety and security of all these folks, because they didn't want to have some kind of atrocity on their hands or whatever, and they are convinced, and they reported to me repeatedly that they believe that there were criminal elements using the whole Caravan thing essentially as cover for their movements and activities.
This is very distressing to even hear this. This has been a problem for decades. Even Eisenhower, was it Eisenhower that had did you say that Mexico was a failed state? Did you mention that?
That's my opinion. Yeah, I really believe that. There's this veneer, this very thin veneer of sort of that it's a functioning democracy, but I think it's only about a quarter inch deep. I think that there's such tremendous corruption and criminality that Mexico kind of barely keeps it together. And so, my opinion is it's either at the brink of teetering over into being a failed state, or it's actually there, but no one wants to really say it out loud because that's not terribly polite. And
in fact, El Salvador doesn't have a government, does it? Do they have a?
No, El Salvador is also a wreck. There was a report, I believe, this weekend. I think it was in the Saturday Wall Street Journal, discussing gang activity in El Salvador and how all the sort of normal means of justice and the procedures and processes that one would expect with law enforcement, justice, and courts, they're not functioning. They're simply not operating. And so that now it resorts to sort of the gang domination of the country.
Oh, well, Chris Farrell, thank you very much for joining me on the Naked Truth Report. We were listening to Chris Farrell, who was in Guatemala. He's the Director of Investigations and Research for Judicial Watch. Thank you very much, Chris. Oh, he hung up that fast? Anyway, but I want to thank my Truth Warriors for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye.